Hi Stitchy friends, my name is Kenzie from Mud Puppy Stitchery, and I'd like to bring you along on a bit of a journey with me trying to figure out the best way to fully finish my small cross-stitch finish, which is Love and Prickles by Lindy Stitches. I wasn't entirely sure how I wanted to fully finish this piece, and so I wanted to bring you along on my trip to Hobby Lobby to help explain my process. Sometimes it can be extremely overwhelming to try and decide how you want your piece to look, especially when you worked really hard on it and you don't want to accidentally mess it up. Hopefully this video will give you some ideas and some confidence to give it a try because it's really fun and definitely worth the effort. As a disclaimer, my motto for finishing is to putz around and find out, and so you'll get to see all of the multiple mistakes that I made and what I did to fix them. My tip number one for if you don't know how to fully finish one of your cross-stitch pieces is to wander around a craft store, an antique store, or even a thrift shop. And the key is to think outside of the box. So ask yourself, can I attach my cross-stitch onto this object in a creative way? And you'd be surprised at what you can come up with. I will usually always go to the unfinished wood section because there's always so many options and you can easily customize the look with paint or stain. And another tip is to bring your cross stitch with, if you're able to, so you can place it on the items and gauge the size of your finished piece. If something doesn't necessarily fit perfectly, that's okay, because you can always add a layer of sticky board covered in corresponding fabric to help your stitched piece fit better on the object. You can see I've got lots of wood options here, and I pulled this really cool wicker sheet because it had a lot of interesting texture. If your cross stitch is more simple, then adding some sort of texture will add a lot of visual interest to the fully finished piece. And then I saw the glass section. I have always wanted to try fully finishing something onto glass, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity. I found this really cool glass container that had a flat surface, and so it would be perfect to mount my cross-stitch piece on. I looked around and really wanted to find something interesting to fill it with to add more texture, and I found several colors of river rocks and pebbles that I thought would work perfectly. I also wanted to create my own cording using my cording maker, and so I was pulling a whole bunch of DMCs that were in the same color family as my fabric, which was 18 Count Moss by My Vintage Needle Arts on Etsy. I also wanted to add some sort of charm and tie it around the top of the bottleneck, and so I thought these would all be good options. So I brought everything home and got my supplies together and made sure to iron my cross-stitch piece really well. You'll need some sort of glass container and something to fill it with, and I chose these really pretty green river rocks, and I ended up getting 2 packs, but only needed 1. I ended up choosing the little acorn charm and picked out a couple complimentary DMC flosses to use for the cording. And this was so funny, I had to get these Bigfoot charms because it made me laugh. For other supplies, I used the white illustration board, which is nice because it's a lot thinner than sticky board or mounting board, and it actually worked really well. You'll definitely need some sort of glue gun, or if you'd rather use Aleene's tacky glue, I feel like that should work just fine as well. If you'd like to make your own cording, I'd recommend the custom quarter, and I bought that off of 123 Stitch. Or you can just use whatever trimmings or ribbon that you have around. You'll need some sort of scissors or X-Acto knife to cut the illustration board, and fabric scissors to cut down your cross-stitch piece. I would also recommend lots of pins to help position your piece in place before you glue everything down. You'll also need some sort of marking tool, and a seam ripper is definitely handy sometimes. I like to use this polyfill fleece batting that I think is used for quilts, but this adds cushion around your illustration board so it's not so harsh looking. So my initial idea was to turn this into an oval shape, but the problem was that I could not find any oval templates at Hobby Lobby, and I looked around in my kitchen for something oval that I could trace, but I could not find anything. So mistake number 1 was me attempting to figure out how to create my own perfect oval to fit my piece. This, as you'll see, did not go as planned. I probably could have just printed an oval template and used that as a guide, but that sounded like a lot of work and I was on a roll. So what you'll see me doing here is measuring about how big I want my piece, as if it were going to be a rectangle. And please excuse my big head that's getting in the way. But I measured about how much fabric I wanted to show around the outside and wrote that down on my illustration board. So I wanted it to be around 6.5 by 12.5 centimeters or so. So I measured out a 6.5 by 12.5 centimeter rectangle on my board, and my working theory was that I could measure 1 centimeter in from each corner and then use something rounded to evenly trace the corners, making it a sort of oval shape. I mean, it kinda sorta worked and didn't look awful, but I ended up not being super happy with the shape. I decided to cut it out anyway and try it on my cross-stitch piece just to see if that changed my mind. So I am going to speed this process up quite a bit, but you'll see me doing very loose running stitches around the outside of the piece, and this allows me to tighten the string and it forms a closure on the back. I was fiddling and poking the piece with my pins to try and center it, but I wasn't entirely convinced that I liked it. I decided to go ahead anyway and add the fleece batting onto the oval piece using hot glue, hoping that this would make it look better. Surprise, it did not. So back to the drawing board. I ended up making another 6.5 by 12.5 centimeter rectangle piece of illustration board and started using my hot glue gun to cover it with the fleece batting so that it had some cushioning. And you'll just glue one side at a time, pulling it nice and tight so that there are no ripples of fabric. And when you're folding in sides 3 and 4, make sure to take an extra square size snip of the fabric before you glue it down, because this really does help get rid of some of the bulk just around the corners, and everything should lay smoother. For the corners, I just use my fingers to pinch and hold the fabric into place so that it looks good on the other side, and then hot glue it down. I'm not super concerned about how the corners look on this underlayer, but it's good practice before gluing your top layer of cross stitch. At this point, I wiggle my cross stitch around on the rectangle and start putting a few pins here and there to hold it in place as I try to center it. I don't have any good tips except keep pinching and pinning and redoing until you're mostly happy with the placement. So at this point, before I glue it, I tried it on my glass container to see how it would look, and would you be surprised, I did not like it. The right and left sides had just slightly too much fabric showing and didn't look in proportion with the top and the bottom. So here I am, very begrudgingly, trying to pick the hot glue off of the illustration board, but to no avail. And so I tossed that nonsense and ended up starting over again. And I literally only cut off a half centimeter on the side, but that surprisingly made a big difference and I was much happier with it. So I suppose it was worth the extra effort. So you'll see me doing the exact same thing as I was doing with the fleece underlayer, hot gluing each side, and I actually just barely had enough fabric around the corners because my cross stitch piece was still cut in that slight oval shape, so I didn't need to take any extra snips out of the fabric. But I glued the corners the exact same way by pinching and holding with the tip of my finger, making sure it looked okay on the correct side, and putting a lot of hot glue down to hold it into place. Again, it's just a lot of pinching and adjusting. And as you can see, my corners were not satisfactory to me. So there is an additional way that you can neaten them up. I actually learned this trick from Helen D here on Flosstube, and I'll make sure to link her down below, where you actually sew up the corners on the wrong side and it makes it look so much neater on the front side. So basically you're just taking little bites of fabric on either side of the corner and pulling tight, and it makes it look so much better from the front side. I was having some issues getting the needle through all of this hot glue that I had laid down, but it ended up looking better and I was much happier with it. Finally, it was time to actually glue my cross-stitch piece onto the glass container. Hallelujah! And I just slapped a whole bunch of hot glue on the backside and stuck it right on the glass, and luckily it stuck no problem. I started adding in all of my river rocks and was getting really excited at this point because it was finally starting to come together. And I only needed one bag of rocks, so I'll save the second bag for another project. Next, it was time to make some cording using our custom quarter. And it's really hard to show on camera how to make cording, so I decided to make some illustrations instead. So to start out, you'll need to roughly measure around your piece with some floss and add a couple inches for extra insurance. And then you take that length and fold it over on itself 3 more times. So you end up with 4 times the amount of floss that you originally measured. So this uses up a lot of floss, by the way. And so now you have one really long string of the correct length, and you'll need 5 more for a total of 6 really long lengths of string. You'll put 3 lengths to one side and the other 3 to the other side. I tried to show you different colors how I make the floss variegated, but you can use whatever floss combination you want to make it your own unique look. I sometimes like to use 3 floss colors, one darker, one medium, and one lighter color. For placing the colors together, I'll put 2 dark and 1 medium on one side, and 2 medium and 1 light on the other. And this gives a really nice blended look. The next step is to take one of your bundles of 3 and tie the ends together. You don't want to do the same thing yet to the other bundle of 3. What you need to do is loop the other bundle through the first bundle, and then you can tie the ends. So this is a very complicated way of saying that you loop the bundles together so that they're attached in the middle, and then you're ready for the next step. It's much easier to watch someone do the next step, so I'm going to put Helen D's cording video listed down below and in a card at the top. But hopefully this gave you a general idea of how much floss you'll need and how you can combine colors to give it an interesting variegated look. So I noticed there was a large gap in between my stitched piece and the glass, and I wanted to figure out a way to fill that gap before placing down my cording. I was able to find some chenille that I wedged inside of that gap and hot glued down. And so if you looked at the piece from the side, it would look more finished and professional. Once I had that hot glued into place, I took the cording and laid that on top of the chenille right up against that cross-stitch piece and was actually able to wrap it around twice to give it a double layered look and very carefully hot glued it down. I kind of liked the look of the little tail sticking out at the bottom, and so I left it and added a pin right into the knot to hold it in place extra well. And last but not least, I had enough cording left to tie around the bottleneck and add the little acorn charm. The cording was too thick to string the charm onto it, so I just hid an extra length of floss in the center and attached the charm to that, but covered it strategically so you can't tell. And that finishes up my cross-stitch piece. That was a little bit of a crazy journey, but I hope you enjoyed the ride, and I'm really pleased with how it turned out. I hope this gives you some inspiration to attempt finishing your own pieces in a creative way. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like, leave a comment, and subscribe if you are so inclined. I will be back with a more normal update video soon, so take care, and I will see you in a bit.